I'm about to whip somebody's ass. Oh, I'm about to whip somebody's ass. Oh, if you don't leave me alone, you're gonna have to send me home. 'Cause I'm about to whip somebody's ass.
Welcome to the Cannonballs Podcast. I'm your host, Ken. Thanks for joining the show. I want to start this out by giving you just a little bit about me before I get into the actual show. I'm retired military. I worked in the military in petroleum logistics. I had a high concentration in quality assurance, and I worked from the guy who was refueling the aircraft all the way up to the senior enlisted manager in charge of around 60 people. After retirement, I got a job in the private sector managing construction for the same systems that I operated as a young guy. I worked in the construction industry for another over a decade, and primarily in the military sector. We would build or repair or modify systems really all around the world. I worked around the United States. I worked in Europe. My last job was working out of Germany, but I worked in several countries from that job. I loved it. It was a job that gave me the opportunity to do a lot of things that I love. I like to create things, and I have an eye for details. So as the construction manager, most of the time I had a dual hat as the senior quality assurance manager as well. So I had to ensure that the work was completed correctly, but I also had a responsibility to the government as a signator to ensure that contracts were completed in exact accordance to the statement of work. So I was responsible directly for the execution of the contracts. I've been trained in paying attention by the military and by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's a natural part of me. It's always felt natural. And I've had a lot of training. So I tend to pay attention to words. I tend to pay attention to clues. I like to understand how things work, which is what brought me to this podcast. Because there are lots of things that I try to understand and I try to read about that I had no idea about before, and I learned lots of things that I think will be of interest to fellow Bucs fans. So I thought that I would start a podcast to concentrate on some of those things. The first thought might be, well, why a podcast in Tampa Bay? There are a lot of great podcasts in Tampa Bay, and that's for sure. In my opinion, Tampa Bay is one of the richest areas in the football world for online content, vocal and visual content from podcasts. That's some really, really, really great shows out there. But most of these shows do one or two things. They either break the news or they talk about the news. And this podcast is not going to be about either one of those two things. I love that content, though. Don't get me wrong. There are some really, really, really good ones out there. One of my favorites, and I'll just talk about a few of them. There are lots of them, but these are in the top of my rotation. You have the Locked On Bucks podcast with David and James. Those two guys are some of the best analysis in the business. Pewtercast, Brent and Ren, the ultimate fan experience. If you haven't checked those guys out, you have to do it because they are really, really, really a fun follow. In the Trenches, Ian Beckles. Ian tells it like it is. You don't have to like it, but he's going to tell you the way he sees it. Ian and I are a lot alike in that way. I'm not going to tell you something that is politically correct. I'm not going to take a middle ground with you. I'm never going to do that. I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm thinking. I'm going to tell you exactly how I see it. We don't have to agree. I'm providing information. I'm providing information that you can use or you can discard. Samar Ali and the Loose Cannons. Woof. Samar brings the fire. Samar brings the heat. Love that show. Crazy ass stank. And it's bucking idiots. This is always entertaining. It's a really fun show. The first couple of Buccaneers talk is always interesting and insightful and entertainment. The Buccaneers Observer, Raph and Molly are fantastic. Real Bucks Talk, Michael Pless and Mark Ramirez. Another two guys who bring the solid analysis. They are great balance for each other. I really, 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 I never miss their shows. Absolutely never miss them. Great shows. Pless also joins Gene in his show, Buck What You Heard, and he's a YouTube-based video as well. I love listening to Gene. Gene is that calm, that voice of reason. He always seems to be able to see a topic for what it is. He just has a way of, you feel good listening to him no matter what your position. I love Gene's show. I try not to miss a single episode. And then you have the big boys. These are all the smaller podcasts. You have the big boys, like the Pewter Report. Those guys do a fantastic job of the hard analysis. They are can't miss podcasts. Even if Mark Cook keeps interrupting everyone, and Mark Cook's humor is so bad, and then I find myself laughing and I just want to put myself in timeout. How could you possibly have laughed at that? It's like a train wreck, I guess. Mark is. You can't look away from it. You just keep looking, and Mark does that from the show. I guess that adds a lot to the show if you really admit it. I do enjoy it even when I hate it. So hats off to Mark. But these are all great shows, but like I said, they're in my rotation, but I'm not going to be competing with any of them. My show is going to be on topics that are of interest to Bucks fans, that I personally found interesting enough that I would take the time to do in-depth research to try to understand them. Remember, I'm an analyst at heart. I'm an analyst at heart, and I'm an analyst by training. So I'd like to understand exactly how things work. And I thought, what good is that information if I'm not going to share it with someone? Hence the reason for the show. On each of my shows, I will cover one or two topics. And on this show, I started out intending to cover two topics, but by the time I got into the show, I quickly discovered that I better limit it to just one. I'm trying to make these shows to limit them to around 30 to 40 minutes, but this particular show is probably going to go a little bit longer than that. We'll see once I finish editing. Remember, this is an opinion show, and I try to back it by data, by film analysis, and by stats. I break down, I find information, I dive deep into the who's and the how's, and then I try to find out the why's, and I want to share it with you. So before I get into this show, let's have a look at what's on deck for the next show. In the next shows, the very next one on deck will be a look at the Todd Bowles defense, which I find absolutely fascinating. And I think I have to look at it as front seven and back seven, which is not your typical way of looking at a defense, but that's really how you have to look at the Todd Bowles defense. The way he brings pressure and how he causes confusion, the deceptions, all the things involved with that. Spoiler alert, you don't need a top 10 pass rusher to be able to get it done in the Todd Bowles defense. That's next week. Another one on deck is going to be the opposite side of the ball, the Bruce Arians offense, the role for Chris Godwin's, the use of tight ends. There's been a lot of talk about he doesn't use tight ends. Spoiler alert, that's not true. And how he uses running backs, their role in the offense. You got to be able to catch the ball to make the team for Bruce Arians. And the wide receiver roles in general, pushing the ball deep. And at some point, I'm going to talk about this 18-game schedule whenever I can fit it in. It'll just be a short segment, so it will be a second to one of the major topics that I intend to cover. And another one that will come up fairly soon, probably just after the Hall of Fame game. I want to talk about the Hall of Fame as it relates to Rondé Barber. Who should be the next Buccaneer in the NFL Hall of Fame? How should we look at the NFL voting? And what needs to change in that system? I have some pretty strong ideas about that. But today's show is about Jason Pierre Paul's neck injury and a breakdown of the injury, including exactly what he injured, the type of treatments that he considered, the type of treatment that he selected, and his expected or anticipated recovery time. Then I'll break down a little bit of JPP's role in the Todd Bowles defense, which there seems to be a considerable amount of confusion about. And then I'll take just a little peek into the different formations that Todd Bowles used as they relate to JPP's use in this new 3-4 base defense. So let's get into it. All Bucs fans remember that Jason Pierre Paul was involved in a car accident on the 2nd of May 2019. Word is that he was driving after or during heavy rains. His car hit a patch of water, hydroplane, and he lost control, hitting a barrier. Audio release after the accident showed a calm Jason Pierre Paul calling for assistance to remove his car from impeding traffic. The Bucs rightfully wanted their doctors to examine JPP just to be sure, and it's a good thing because they found what appeared to be a fracture in JPP's neck. Bruce Arians said this.
No, I think that's still ongoing, and like Jason said, we've got our fingers crossed and praying for him. Very unfortunate, and all we can do is just pray and hope for the best, and hope it's one of those 5 or 6 month things, and go from there.
Then this hit Twitter, and the NFL-wide speculation started.
Scott, let's start with the accident for which Jason Pierre Paul was not cited. My understanding is it was raining. His car hydroplaned off the road. He was treated and released from a local hospital the same day, which is generally a good sign. When the Buccaneers medical staff got a look at Pierre Paul's scans, they became concerned that this was something more serious, specifically a fractured vertebrae in JPP's neck that potentially would require surgery. However, I am told Pierre Paul is sending out the results of those scans to several other doctors in the coming days. If he needs surgery, that could entail a 5 to 6 month recovery, which would knock him out for at least part of the upcoming season. But there is also hope that potentially this is something that could heal on its own, and Pierre Paul could even be back in time for Week 1. Obviously, losing Pierre Paul for any stretch of time would be bad news for a Bucs team that is counting on him coming off of a 12.5 sack season. To this point, the Bucs have said very little. General Manager Jason Licht did release a statement that said, in part, we wanted to ensure that our medical team had an opportunity to perform a thorough evaluation here in Tampa, and that process is ongoing.
Immediately, I had so many questions. It simply did not add up to me. I follow Pro Football Doc, who seemed to have similar questions and concerns, so I knew that I was not looking at it in the wrong way. Out for 5 to 6 months for a bone break was just odd to me. So when I got time, I started to research it. I was even more confused. Not that I didn't understand it, but that the medical prognosis was different from what everyone was saying. Pro Football Doc said this on Twitter on 8th May. No video for me to study, but with fact patterns of release from hospital the same day, and then vertebrae fracture, doubt significant or unstable fracture, unless hospital really dropped the ball. Hope to avoid surgery, and even if fusion, could be back in 4 months. He released another tweet on the same day. Of course, I have not examined JPP or seen his imaging studies, but not out of the questions to be ready for Week 1 with or without surgery. I hope we get good news. My first question was, what does he mean by unstable fracture? The second was, why did he say 4 months and everybody else is saying 5 to 6 months that JPP would be out? He thinks that JPP could be back for the regular season. So I thought, do you mean 4 months as in back playing or back in something else? It wasn't clear. First things first, I'm not a medical expert and I have no medical training outside of first aid and CPR, but I can read and understand. So that is what I set out to do. Secondly, a neck injury is potentially serious. In fact, in describing the problem, breaking your neck is right up there with the most serious things that you can do. You hear people say, I'm serious as cancer or serious as a heart attack. But anytime we play around in high places, the first part of the body that anyone talks about when they warn us about falling is the neck. I bet most of us have heard at some point in our lives, get down from there before you fall and break your neck. No one ever expects you to actually break your neck, but if you did, the outcome is usually bad. But a fall is not the reason for JPP's injury. That's not what happened. So the first question is, what is a stable fracture? As best that I can surmise, a stable fracture is when a broken bone is in little or no risk of degrading, meaning breaking further or moving from its current position if properly protected. That's important because in order for bone to heal, meaning bond to the previous fractured part, it must remain in position. That's why a limb is put in a cast to heal. But not all body parts can be immobilized that way. The pinky toe, for instance, is one of them. If you break your pinky toe, all you can do is protect it until it heals, unless it requires surgery to reconstruct it or something like that. The neck is similar. If no surgery is needed, all you can do is support it so that the bone is undisturbed until it heals. There are several ways to do this that I will briefly discuss soon, but first, what exactly are we dealing with? What did JPP break? There's been no direct information about the precise broken bone or the area of the fracture, but most agree that JPP suffered a fracture of the odontoid process, also called dents. The odontoid process, or dents, is a superior projecting bony element from the second cervical vertebrae, C2, or the axis. The first cervical vertebrae, the atlas, rotates around the odontoid process to provide a largest single component of lateral rotation of the cervical spine. Fractures of the odontoid process are classified into one of three categories, which are type 1, type 2, and type 3 fractures. These types are not arranged in a degree of seriousness, but rather classified depending on the location of the fracture on the vertebrae. This is an image of the three types of odontoid fractures. It is widely believed that JPP suffered a type 2 fracture based primarily on JP's reported circumstances and their similarities of what is typical in a type 2 fracture. A type 2 odontoid fracture is a fracture through the base of the odontoid process. According to the National Center for Biotechnology Information, odontoid processes occur as a result of a trauma to the cervical spine. In young patients like JPP, they are typically the result of a high-energy trauma which occur as a result of a motor vehicle or driving accident, exactly what happened with JPP. The most common mechanism of the injury is a hyperextension of the cervical spine, pushing the head and C1 vertebrae backwards. Management of the type 2 odontoid fracture is a long enduring controversy. The questions are, should conservative management with a halo or cervical collar immobilization be adopted, or should surgical reduction or fusion be undertaken? JPP is wearing a Vista cervical collar. According to their website, this collar is an adjustable universal cervical collar for neck injuries and stabilization. If JPP had a more serious injury, perhaps he would have been fitted with one of these halo vests, which allow almost no movement of the head or neck. These highly restricted devices are also often used after surgery of the vertebrae. Studies utilizing external immobilization to help the fracture heal have reported a wide range of results varying from ineffectiveness to 93% success rate. This prognosis is important because of the possible complications from surgery, which are significant. One of the possible outcomes from surgical options or fusions is that the screw or cervical stabilization procedure provide a 74 to 90% fusion rate. In that case, JPP would have had the same chance or about the same chance of successful fusion, meaning the fractured bone reattaching to the other side of the break with or without the surgery. In fact, a study titled Surgical versus Conservative Management considered the use of a collar as support for odontoid fractures versus the surgical option. The article published in the Cochrane Database of Systematic Review concluded the following, quote, "The review aimed to examine the evidence from randomized controlled trials comparing the surgical versus conservative treatment of these fractures to find if either approach gave a better outcome. Despite comprehensive research, the review authors found no evidence from complete randomized controlled trials to inform the choice between surgical and conservative management," unquote. This lack of clear guidance on the best way to approach this injury explains the immediate concern from the Bucs that JPP may need surgery. One of the major concerns of anyone who elects fusion of any of the vertebrae in the neck is that there will be some loss of movement as a minimum, and in some cases, far more serious problems. I understand why, based on the two options having very similar success rates and the known complications of surgery, why JPP would decide to attempt a non-surgical option. Any loss of movement in the neck would likely be a significant threat to any future career in the NFL. Simply stated, surgery could have possibly been a career ender. So how does the bone in the neck heal? Well, just like every other bone, secure it and let nature take its course. Following any fracture, inflammation starts immediately and lasts for several days. When the bone is fractured, there's bleeding in the area, leading to inflammation and clotting of blood at the fracture site. That provides the initial structural stability and the framework for producing new bone. Beginning first with new bone called soft callus, the healing progresses, forming hard bone known as hard callus, which is visible on a X-ray several months after the fracture. So medical personnel can actually determine the degree of healing. Bone remodeling, the final phase of bone healing, goes on for several months. In remodeling, bone continues to form and becomes compact, returning to its original shape. In addition, blood circulation in the area improves. Bone generally takes 6 to 12 weeks to heal to a significant degree. JPP is due to be reevaluated in the next 2 weeks. The next scheduled examination of JPP's injury site by his doctors and Bucs medical staff will determine his future. It will likely involve some form of high-resolution imaging to determine the exact nature and degree of bone generation, if any, around the fracture site. If the bone repair is fully formed, then Jason Pierre Paul return to football is a matter of when he can be sufficiently conditioned to return to football activities. One immediate concern is the fact that as soon as we stop using muscles, they start to lose muscle mass. JPP would need to strengthen the muscles in his neck, especially, but physical conditioning will be needed for his entire body to get ready for football activities. I have no idea how long it will take, but judging it based on my own previous training for organized sports, 6 to 8 weeks of disciplined training always put me into top condition for anything. I have high hopes for JPP. In my opinion, no one is more driven on the Buccaneers roster. If anyone can return for this, it would be JPP. Once he gets the green light, JPP will be relentless in his preparation. Based on conservative estimates of 12 weeks from around 8 May, when the decision was announced that he wasn't going to have surgery, we get a date of around July 31st for JPP's reevaluation. It may be sooner. Using conservative estimates of 8 additional weeks of rehab and physical training, that gives JPP a return to football date on or about 25 September 2019. So, my guess is that the Bucs are using the worst case scenario in their prognosis for JPP when they stated that he would be out for 5 to 6 months. They appear to be taking this with an abundance of caution, and they are right to do so. This is how the Pro Football Doc summed it up, however, recently in his podcast.
Here's my newest and latest theory. Just a theory. I haven't examined Jason Pierre Paul, but I think the NFL Network reporters are awesome. I think Adam Schefter and the ESPN reporters are awesome. And if you read all their reports, the descriptions, what Bruce Arians, his head coach, is saying, I conclude he likely has a type 2 odontoid fracture. And I know you guys listening are saying, Dr. Chow's off his rock. Now he's trying to make diagnoses off of media reports and not even seeing film. I'm not making a diagnosis. This is speculation on my part, informed speculation. Quincy medical examiner stuff, a hunch, a theory. Why? First of all, it can't be a very bad or displaced fracture. Because if there was, there's no way the hospital would have let him go. If the fracture was evident on plain films, they wouldn't let him go. A fracture dislocation, a facet injury, spinous process, any of those things, you'd see it. And they obviously didn't see it, at least on initial x-rays. Maybe there was a CT scan, who knows. An odontoid fracture, which is the base of C2 up high, is one that you don't always see, especially if it's a type 2 fracture. Number two, they discovered it on further imaging. That's something the odontoid can. And there was lots of controversy of surgery or not surgery. Well, it clearly was a non-displaced fracture, and those are controversial whether you do surgery or not. An odontoid type 2. In addition, if you fix a neck fracture, usually it increases your chance of recovery, but in this case, it's not. And that fits with odontoid, because an odontoid fracture, you put one home run screw. It's not three-dimensional fixation from all planes with plates and multiple screws. So the fixation is only to hold it in place to let the bone heal, as opposed to bone graft and forcing the bone to heal. So that fits odontoid. And it also seems very clear that they're not rushing him. And that fits with odontoid. Because guess what? If it's really true that was an odontoid, and by the way, odontoid fractures happen in motor vehicle accidents with the whiplash type effect. And if it were a displaced odontoid fracture, I don't even want to say it, but I mean, death often is the result. If you injure your spinal cord that high, it cuts off even the breathing center. Forget the fact that being a quadriplegic, death is what can happen. And I think if you look at JPP and his camp, they haven't come out and said, oh yeah, he'll make it back week one, etc. I think everyone's being cautious here. And my interpretation of this amount of caution, to me, indicates it's a high cervical fracture, likely odontoid. It's not your typical C5-6 or C6-7 type deal that we typically see. So we'll see what happens there. I applaud the team, the player, and doctors being cautious of this situation. If 5-6 months is what it is, so be it. The last thing you want to do is rush them back at 4 months and then have something catastrophic happen. So I understand what they're doing. And like I said, it usually always makes sense. But that's my Quincy medical examiner, and sorry for you younger listeners. You don't even know what that is. Look it up, Jack Klugman. Look, I look nothing like Jack Klugman, but I was intrigued with the show when I was little, etc. But deductive reasoning here, my thought is JPP with an odontoid, high cervical fracture, likely type 2 fracture.
The Buccaneers play the New York Giants at Raymond James Stadium on 22 September 2019. If I had to place a bet on whether or not JPP will return to football, provided that he receives a clean report for a good bond on the bone in his neck this month, I would not place a bet against JPP being on the field on 22 September against his old team. At this point, no one knows for sure if the fracture in Jason Pierre Paul's neck has grown a good bond. But barring something unfortunate, if all goes well, don't count out JPP for being on the field very early in the 2019 season. So assuming that JPP will make his recovery, how will Todd Bowles use him in his new defense? There's been a lot of misunderstanding surrounding how JPP will be used in the new 3-4 base defense. Let's hear what Bruce Arians had to say about how he planned to use his key defensive players.
Same thing with the D-line, you know. Golson put maybe a little more weight and do his natural thing, you know. NASA stand up, get down, I mean, he's a cat we can put anywhere. JPP hasn't played over a guard much, but he's going to. And I think he's going to like it, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of pieces there. You know, Shaq Barrett is a slippery guy that I really like because not only is he a really good third down player, he's a good special team player.
JPP is moving inside, at least part of the time, playing over the guard as a 3-4 defensive end. Immediately after his accident, knowing that Bruce planned to use JPP inside, I was active on Twitter calling for the Bucs to make a play on Ndamukong Suh. One would assume that in nickel defenses or 4-3 formations, JPP would move outside again to the 3-4 defensive end position with Vea and Suh wreaking havoc in the middle at nose and defensive tackle. That would give JPP tremendous opportunities to go up against O-linemen who are not used to his dynamic physicality, length, and relentless motor, traits that are not that common on the inside. Let's remind ourselves what the Bucs have in JPP. What does JPP mean to the team? High motor, high effort. Look at this. This is a 6'8", 320-pound Alejandro Villanueva. JPP is the definition of team first. He wants to win. He lives to win. Manhandle like a man half his size. This is what JPP can do to smaller guys like Jason Peters. Power, relentless power. This is pure technique. This is winning. Mano a mano. I'm better than you. That sack took JPP to 6 straight games with a sack. You can tell by Light's drafting over the last several drafts that he loves high motor. Winning in chaos. Winning in chaos. This is what a good D-line does. High motor guys thrive in this. Speed. Pure, unadulterated speed. JPP on a stunt. This is the stuff of nightmares. Shot out of a cannon. Wow. On the run, shedding blocks, first contact. He's unstoppable. Everybody wondered, can JPP rush standing up? Can he be an outside linebacker? Absolutely. This is ball awareness. This is what you do when you know where the ball is at all times. This is how you get the huge tackle numbers and lots of sacks. JPP, with his influence on Vita Vea, blitzing, stunting, speed kills. Power. JP sets the edge and he holds it. JPP, Nassif, Nelson. These are prototypes. All three of those guys have very, very, very similar qualities. Length, high motor, relentless, stronger than normal. This is a body type that Light has selected to put on the outside. These guys are versatile. They can go inside. I expect to see Carl Nassif on the inside at some point during the season this year. Now, I don't want to get too wrapped up in the D-line conversation because the defense is on deck for next week's show. But I want to show you some basic Todd Bowles formations to wet your whistle. The Todd Bowles defense is not so different from every other NFL defense. What Todd Bowles seems to do that's special is that he can line up his players in one of about 3 to maybe 4 different alignments and have an infinite number of ways to attack you from those few formations. It's a very simple defense. A little bit complicated, it seems, for the players to learn their different roles in each one of them. But it doesn't change a whole lot. He uses a 5-man front on the D-line in the 3-4. He uses a 4-man front and a 4-2, 4-2 under, and a few variations of that. And from a 3-4, he uses a 3-man front on the D-line, which I didn't think he would use it very much, but it seems that he used it quite often. So I'm going to take you through a few of these. This is your basic 3-4 look. You have your 3 interior guys here. Outside linebacker, 2 middle linebackers. And this is just your basic everyday NFL 3-4 formation and your basic NFL 3-4 play. So what you have here is you have your safeties. You have your safeties who are playing halves, and that seems to be a favorite for him in this formation. Attacking and clogging. Notice how that line of scrimmage is not moved. That is the type of control of the line of scrimmage that's absolutely essential in the Todd Bowles defense. This is your same 3-4 look. You have your 3 down linemen, a couple outside linebackers, 2 middle linebackers, but this time you have a safety who's moved up. You notice that your men, the outside corners are pressed, and you have a single high safety on this one. That's getting home. That is getting home. So here you have your 4-3 look. It's actually closer to a 4-2. These two middle linebackers don't seem to change a lot. Every now and again you see 3 there. But in this case, if it is 3, this would be a 4-3 under, where you have your safety playing up around the line of scrimmage. This is one of the things that I get into next week. What this quarterback doesn't know is what this safety is going to do. Is he up here to press here? You see, they appear to be in a man defense because you have movement here. But what's actually going to happen? That's what's the real question. Let's see. So they were actually in a zone defense, but there was no way to tell unless you shift your receiver from one side of the field to the other. That receiver did not shift far enough to know the difference. All right, we're back to the 4-3, but this time we have a real 4-3. We have 4, we have 3. We have a safety that's shadowing off of the defensive end here, and we are tight. We are tight in a man with a single high safety. This is the reason why Todd Bowles needs guys like Devin White. This ability to get upfield, to control the field from sideline to sideline in the execution of this play. If you're going to press, you better have linebackers that can cover. That's the reason why the Bucs went out and signed Devin White. This is one that I find completely fascinating. 1, 2, 3 down linemen. This appears to be a linebacker. My guess is that that's the money backer. You have your 2 inside linebackers here. 1 press, 1 just a little bit off. 2 safeties high in halves at what it appears to be. These big guys have a big job here. They attack, penetrating. This is why Bruce Arians went out and got Ndamukong Suh. Because with Ndamukong Suh and Vita Vea as one of these 2, as 2 of these 3 people, no matter who you have on your line, they're going to have their hands full. Because you need to get 2 sets of hands on each one of those 2 guys. Your third guy here, it can be a whatever person. He needs to win a one-on-one. Because somebody is not going to be double. There's only going to be 5 guys here. If you're going to line up 3 men, they have to create havoc. When you have a player like Campbell, you can do this. 3 against 5. Beat your double team. This is why Todd Bowles and BA went out and got Ndamukong Suh to line him up next to Vita Vea. Those 2 men strong as mules on the interior. You got to get 2 sets of hands. If one person gets there late on the protection, too late. Game over. That is why the Bucs went out and signed Ndamukong Suh. If you put Ndamukong Suh out wide like that in a 3-man front, or if you put Vita Vea out wide like that in a three-man front, the tackle has no help, they're going to get home about half the time. If you're getting home half the time, the opposing team is going to lose. You got to get two sets of hands on those two guys. If JPP gets back in the lineup and he's that third man, oh my goodness. This is a brief look at the Todd Bowles defense. Next week, I'm going to break it down. I'm going to break it down in its completeness from the front to the back. The secondary, their role in the pass rush. Linebackers, their role in the pass rush. And how they all come together. They work as two units. And I'll explain it next week. This first show was quite the challenge because it was all new to me, at least in this format for sports podcasting. I've done a lot of the legwork for next week's show, and future shows will drop on Wednesdays. That wraps up this week's podcast, but don't forget to smash that thumbs up button and leave a comment on the YouTube page. You can reach me on Twitter at @K_from_FLA. Give me a follow for advance notice of all the future shows.
I'm not about building. I'm about reloading.